Hello, I'm John Nightingale, a director at JCT and the Symposium host. Now, the 25th JCT Traffic Signal Symposium was an online event this year, and I'm delighted to bring you a recording of one of the presentations. Now, these recordings would not have been possible without the support of a select group of our event partners. So our thanks go to the Institute of Highway Engineers, ITS UK, keepadistance.co.uk, Siemens Mobility, TWM, and of course, our media partner, Highways News. Please check out their short videos, which will tell you about some of the products and services that they can provide. Now, I hope you enjoy this presentation, and we would love to see you in person for our 25th anniversary event in Nottingham Trent University in September 2021. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. David's going to be controlling the slides for these, so you will be asking me to hear me, asking him to move them on. So good morning to everyone, and thanks for joining and listening in. So the next 10 to 15 minutes, David and I are going to be talking about bus priority in London and showcasing some of the innovative techniques that we've recently been rolling out, primarily on the UTC bus priority system. Our continued aim in London is to increase the levels of bus priority that we can grant, help bus journey times, lower delay, help passengers. And really the focus of this presentation is what we've been doing to use the existing hardware that we've got deployed on street, not deploying additional hardware, but really very much getting more out of what we already have. And I think this came up as a little bit of a theme yesterday in a few presentations as well. So some nice synergy there. If you could move it on, please, David. Just before we dive in, I just thought you might be interested to know that in about the 15 minutes of time we've been given, London's UTC system is going to receive and process about 16,000 bus priority transmissions from live buses. In the top right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see what that amounts to per day in terms of bus priority activity. And in total, that's about 140,000 different bus priority actions we grant per day for the TfL's bus network. So there's a lot going on all the time. Okay, David. So TfL does operate one of the most frequent and extensive bus networks in the world. There's about 675 routes, almost 9,500 vehicles, and the network itself carried about 2.32 billion people, or 2.32 billion journeys in 2019. We have a bus priority system that supports all of this activity, both UTC and non-UTC. There's around 1,900 sites with bus priority in London, and about 1,500 of those are on UTC. The majority of those operate what we term as standard bus priority. So any bus that's arriving, the junction will look to give it bus priority. We do have about 350 sites which operate with differential bus priority, and this is where priority is granted according to the scheduled deviation of the bus. So if they're early or on time, priority won't be given, but increasingly late, they'll get increasingly high levels of priority. Buses do transport more people than any other public transport mode in London. They provide key links to town centres and many other destinations around the city. They are one of the most efficient forms of road space, and they play a really important role in delivering the Mayor's healthy streets. And they're playing a really important role at the moment in the COVID recovery that we're currently going through. There are, however, currently limitations that we have with the hardware that we use at the junctions themselves. And of course, there's limitations as always with funding. So this has led us to explore innovative ways to get more out of what we already have. I'm now going to hand over to David, who's going to run you through the next few slides and talk about some of those techniques with you.
Mike. So yeah, before I get through my examples, I thought I'd very quickly do an overview of exactly how iBus works. In particular about what a virtual detection point is. So all of the buses on the network have a set of GPS coordinates uploaded that they know where points along the network that they need to send a transmission to let our system know that they're there. So in this particular example, a bus moves into what we call a virtual detection point. Those GPS coordinates have lined up. They send a transmission, our traffic signal hardware on street detects it, and that piece of information is relayed to our UTC in station, and we can use that to grant bus priority if we want. So with that in mind, the first example of what we've done recently was moving these VDPs to adjacent junctions. So this site in Camberwell Road in Southwark, the junction to the north, has 4 virtual detection points, 2 of which manage the 10 routes that travel north-south. And then there was 2 VDPs that manage 1 route turning in and out of a side road. And that picture to the right is attempting to show that that right turn in is actually a give way right turn. So once our system knows the bus is there, we don't actually know if it's managed to pass through in a gap or if it's still waiting. So we determined that 2 of those VDPs were underutilized. So what we did was we updated the GPS coordinates of them, and we placed them either side of the junction to the south. It's a nice picture of me pretending to be a bus to make sure that it works at that distance. But basically, the junction to the south has no bus priority hardware in the controller on site. It's all managed by the site to the north. And by updating all of the information associated with it, updating our UTC in station to match it, we basically gave the junction to the south bus priority. I've called that free bus priority. It's obviously not free, but it's only staff time required to write a software update rather than new hardware and then engineers to install it. The next 2 examples go back to what Mike was talking about with schedule deviation. So again, when that bus moves into its VDP and transmits its message saying that it's here, it also sends the second piece of information, which is its schedule deviation. So in this instance, it's 2 minutes late. And again, we can use that information to grant higher or lower levels of priority if we want to. So this next example actually is a site where we don't use that information to grant priority, i.e. we're happy to grant all buses priority regardless of how early or late they are. So the issue we found with this junction in Denmark Hill in Southwark was, again, we got 1 virtual detection point heading southbound, but buses turn left or they go straight on continuing south. So the problem we found was we know a bus is there, but we don't know if it's about to turn left or go ahead. So, for example, when a bus moving ahead wouldn't benefit from extending stage 3, for example, that only has a left turn in it. So what we needed was another virtual detection point to differentiate between ahead and left buses. That would require a controller update, a controller config update. It's a bit more money. So what we decided to do was convert one of those priority replies that we weren't using in this instance, converted it into a virtual detection point, placed the GPS coordinates alongside the existing one. And again, I've called that free bus priority because it's a software update and our time to go out and observe it and make sure it's correct. And my last example is what we called high priority routes. So this junction in Peckham, it's 14 bus routes through there, a lot of buses through the day. It's running this differential bus priority, i.e. we are giving more priority to buses that are late rather than buses that are early. And we asked the question, could we elevate one of those buses above all others? Could we make it a high priority route? So it's more of a proof of concept. And basically what we did is we updated the configuration of the software again, and we said that every time a route 37 is detected, it doesn't matter what its true schedule deviation is, it could be early, but our UTC system would always classify it as very late. And what this is showing is our counts for that junction. So this is a level 3 very late bus count. So the middle column is showing before, and you can see the column to the right is a lot more because every single Route 37 bus is now in that column and is getting the highest level of priority. So this could be used to give further priority to high frequency or high patronage routes, and is actually already in use in London. We've recently rolled it out to give additional priority to the new express bus, the X140. So yeah, I've called that enhanced bus priority. So I will now hand back to Mike.
Thanks, David. So the last few slides, I'm just going to cover something very recently we've been working on and talk about what happens to bus priority in recovery and something called the override time. So once priority has been given to a bus, whether it's a recall or an extension, the junction then moves into what we term recovery mode. And this is where resynchronization with Scoot occurs following that priority. Now, why do we care about recovery mode? Well, the time that is spent in recovery is time that is not spent on Scoot. So optimization is not occurring as we would necessarily like, and this obviously impacts overall junction operation. It could delay pedestrians, cyclists, even buses on other approaches that may be wanting priority. And incidentally, a really important point around this is that during the recovery mode, it's not impossible, but extremely unlikely that any other bus priority will be given. So certainly at standard bus priority sites, where let's say a bus that was ahead of schedule gets given priority, a late bus might arrive and it can't get priority until recovery is finished. It's worth noting that the majority of sites in London use degree of saturation as the recovery method. This is where recovery is based on thresholds in the system and degrees of saturation returning from street. However, we do have other recovery methods available. They have just not been widely used or explored at the moment. Just as a point, the entire period of time from recovery and the actual priority itself is known as the override time. And if you want to roll on to the next slide, David, we'll just talk about what we've done with that data. So by extracting lots and lots of data from the UTC system, and yes, there's about just over 1,500 sites, over the course of a few months, we actually looked at how often sites were overriding, and there were three specific elements to this we looked at. The first thing we were really interested in were junctions that spent a very low amount of time in override. So this could indicate to us a very low amount of bus priority activity. Perhaps the equipment we've got on street is not working hard enough for us, we're not getting the best out of it or the most out of it, and we're not probably helping buses as much as we could. It could of course also suggest a fault that we could follow up on, and also it could, following investigation, maybe suggest the site isn't very suitable for bus priority. So it could have very low bus flow, maybe even only one bus per hour. And actually, we could ask the question: should that precious piece of kit be removed and repurposed to another site that has more buses where it could give more priority? So that was the first thing. And actually, just as a point, we are looking at a current work stream to how we can repurpose bus priority kit in response to these low override sites. The second set of data that we looked at were junctions that spend a high amount of time in override. So as we've said, if it spends a long time in override, we're not spending time on scoot, we're not able to grant other bus priority. So that's a concern for us. There could be too much bus priority occurring. So should we refine the differential bus priority if it has it available? Or it could just be struggling to recover from the priority that's been granted because of poor system settings. And the third element to the override timer that we considered is an extension of the high override timer. And this is sites which max out. So they're trying to resynchronize with scoot, but if after 4 minutes they haven't been able to resynchronize, the bus priority system just hands the junction back to scoot and essentially says, I've done my best, but I'm not quite where I want to be, so I need you to pick up the pieces. So they're the three things that we looked at. And as a result of looking at those three things, we've actually come up with 75 sites, and they've been added to the time review program, the revised time review program for this financial year. And this is the first time that we've ever specifically looked at this. And the first ever batch of bus equipment time reviews have actually just been completed in this last week. And I'm just going to run through a couple of case studies with you now. So if you want to push on to the next slide, David, thank you. So the first one I want to run through with you is a low override time site. This is near Finsbury Park, and the data did show it spent a small amount of time in override per day. The investigations that we then undertook showed it was running differential bus priority all day long. And really, bus flows change, traffic flows change. Do we need to be really conservative with how we run bus priority there? And really the answer was no. So if you want to hit enter, please, David. What we did to improve this was to enable standard bus priority at suitable times of day when bus flows were lower and the junction itself was quieter, and only have differential bus priority running at certain times of day. So then outside of that differential period, any bus can have priority. And you'll see the two graphs here, both on the same scale on the axes. We've got a lot more bus priority in action following our changes rather than before, and we increased that from about 35 actions per day to 140. So really good, a lot more bus priority occurring because of using data to identify that site wasn't doing much. And the next slide, please, David. And the second one I want to just run through with you is a high override timer site. This junction was spending 5 hours a day sitting in recovery mode or in override. So not a lot of time on scoot when we want it to be optimizing. There are lots of buses going through this junction. They were on competing approaches, and the system was set up with some low target saturations to try and recover too. As a result, it just couldn't recover. So we looked at this, we refined some of the settings in the system. We did inhibit one of the bus movements. There was a right turning bus from the main road onto Lansdowne Road there. Incidentally, this is just south of Vauxhall, so there's a lot of buses heading north-south on the main road. And the right turn bus was a giveaway bus. It was turning through gaps, and then it was requesting priority, before it turned through the gap, and then we were getting override times coming in for a bus that wasn't even there. So we adjusted some thresholds, we inhibited a link, we did change the recovery method here away from degree of saturation, and you'll see from the graph on the bottom right hand side of the screen here that we pretty much maintained the level of bus priority we're giving at that junction, but we've cut by, well, almost down to a third of the amount of time it spends in override. So still a lot of BP activity, but now a lot more scoot control, which is excellent. And the final slide, please, David. So just to bundle it all up with a few conclusions, we do currently have limitations with our funding and hardware availability. So we want to try and explore more opportunities, what we've currently got on our system, and get the most out of it. What we've shown you today are just a few things we've been rolling out to give us new opportunities for bus priority, often at a very low cost, really just staff time involved. And we're also now looking at some previously unconsidered scoot message data, so the override data, to allow us to target reviews of bus priority equipment and get more out of those sites. All of this work can help to reduce bus delay, and for everyone out there who deals with scheme work, this could make borderline schemes acceptable and help to promote pedestrian and cycle schemes while minimising delay for buses. But really, all in all, we're just constantly trying to improve our knowledge of the Scoot iBus system and get more out of what we've already got. And we've got a number of projects on the go at the moment, so maybe we'll be back next year to talk about those as well. So thank you very much for now, and we'll be happy to take some questions.